Then we have the muddy shores. So muddy shores are different from the sandy shore. Muddy shores are usually associated with the estuaries or the salt marshes, right? And or the lagoons. So what happens here is that either if you have the delta region or where the freshwater or the river is going and mixing into the sea, those areas form a very thick muddy shore. And these muddy shores, if there is no water, I mean if there is a tidal variations, then will be exposed to the air. Where is the example? See, in particular this slide, you see in the intertidal zone, when there is a low tide, all the mud flats will be exposed to the air. Otherwise it will be covered with the water, but then again the layer will be very much muddy. Now because of this muddy nature, this creates a very anaerobic conditions in the just few centimeters below the muddy sediments. Okay, so what we understood that muddy shores are mostly located in the river estuaries, or the not river estuaries, like estuaries where the rivers are running off. And then you have in the enclosed bays, in salt marshes, in harbors. And then we know that it is protected from the high current wave, because most of the time it is an enclosed protected base. And then these are more flat, and then the muds are not so easy to dislocate the mud, like how I said in the sandy area. The wave action will move the sand, but in the muddy area it is not so. And as a result of the mud, it creates an anaerobic conditions. So water in the sediment does not always drain away, and there is a very poor interchange of the interstitial water with the seawater above, and a very high internal bacterial population. So all this creates a very anaerobic condition. Um, there is another term associated with the muddy intertidal area, that is a redox potential discontinuity layer. So what happens is that in the top layer, do I have any image for this? No, I don't have. So we can say that's a redox potential discontinuity layer. It's a transient zone between the upper part of the aerobic and lower part of the anaerobic layer. So in the top part, you have the bacteria oxidizing these compounds. If the oxygen is available, bacteria oxidize this, and the end product, including the CO2, N2O, and SO4, and in turn incorporated into the bacterial biomass. And now below the RPD zones, we have anaerobic condition, and redox potential changes from positive to negative. So that is a layer called as redox potential discontinuity layer. In the as you asked, or as somebody asked right now, that if it is so stressful, why they are living. Uh, so we are also asking that who lives in the muddy intertidal zone. Then we can answer also that if we look into the epifauna, there are diatoms, there are seaweeds, also seagrasses in the lowest tidal area layer. So lowest tidal layer means what? It is in the, if we look in the classification of intertidal area, so so the first layer is low tide area, then you have mid tide area, and then you have high tide area. So in the low tide area, it means near to the water, there are epifaunas in the form of diatoms, seaweeds, and seagrasses. There are fauna, as I said, that below a few centimeters into the mud, we have a lot of bacteria, and it does, I mean, chemosynthetic bacteria. Also, a lot of macrofaunas are there. In example, polychaetes, bivalves. A lot of fishes are also there in the that mud skippers and all. And then we have crustaceans, right? There are there are strategies for these organisms to feed. For example, you can see that there is a suspension feeding. It means that this particular organism is having siphon in the water, where the water is coming in and then it's expelling out. So it's a kind of suspension feeding. Then we have deposit feeding. It means that you can see that some of the amphipods, they are feeding on the seaweeds piled above the high tide shorelines. Okay. One more good thing we can try to see when we are doing the field work is the shore scenes. So we will see that a lot of sea grasses and seaweeds are piling up into the high tide zone. And then in the high tide, highest high tide areas in the sandy beach, and a number of organisms are associated or feeding on those seagrasses and seaweeds. Okay. Another deposit feeding example is by the lugworm, where they are uptaking the sand, absorbing the nutrient, and then removing the processed sand. Okay. So and then of course there is a carnivorous feeding. So these are some of the feeding mechanisms in the muddy intertidal areas. Since I said that it's a very challenging environment, at least to what we look into, by saying that there are variations in the salinity in the water, and there is a mud, there is anaerobic conditions. So what kind of adaptations have they developed? So they burrow into the substrata. So it means that they burrow into the sediments. They form permanent tubes. So these permanent tubes will help them to get the nutrients, help them to get the water, oxygen, and so on. There are also physical adaptation to live under the anaerobic condition. For example, burrowing shrimps and clams have a hemoglobin which is having much higher affinity to oxygen. So most of the organisms, if they are living in a oxygen minimum condition, then they have the mechanism, or they have the physiological adaptation where their hemoglobin is capable to having a very high affinity toward the oxygen, so that they can use it for the metabolism. Now, oxygen rich surface water and food through various burrows, holes, tubes appears on the surface of the mud flats. So you can see all these holes, no? These holes in the image. Those are kind of done by the organism which are living there in order to provide the oxygen rich surface water and foods. Okay. So these are some of the adaptations in the intertidal area. Also, a very classical example of mud flats, or that muddy intertidal area, is the presence of mangroves. I am sure that many of us are already aware what mangrove is. It's a kind of coastal plant, and we can also call it as a soldier of our coast, because they are very strong and can protect from the storms which is coming from the seaside, and it protects the whole village. There are several examples when the tsunami came, or whenever the cyclone or a storm comes, then the villages near to the mangroves are well protected. That's why it is also kind of said as a soldier for our coast. Then we have this Royal Bengal tiger, unique feature, unique character, present only in the Sundarbans, and that's again a very good example of muddy intertidal zone. You can see, right? Further adaptation of the mangroves, example prop roots, and then the capability to excrete the sand and so on. We will be seeing when we are going to learn about the marine autotrophs in particular. So So, in a nutshell, what we have seen, also you should remember, or you might have noticed that I am mostly talking about the abiotic factors till now for all the intertidal zone. Of course, there are biotic factors. For example, there are niche partitionings due to the food feeding habits. There is a whole lot of prey predation, communalisms, all those things, mutualisms. Those things will be dealt. Here, in a nutshell, we can say that the salinity, temperature, air, light, pressure, light exposure, tidal flow, waves, rainstorms, substrate modifications, erosions, wind direction, dissolved oxygen, and other natural disasters are mostly the reasons mostly faced by the intertidal organisms in this particular zone.